Welcome back to Civil Wars. I'm William Spaniel, and this lecture is on the limitations of mediation. Previously in this course, we've seen that if the government doesn't know whether the rebel group is weak or strong, but it suspects that the group is in fact very weak, then the government should make a small offer to try to just buy off those weaker types of rebel groups, which in turn means that war is possible if, in fact, the government was facing a strong type of rebel group. The strong type is going to reject the settlement offer and fight a war. But in this class, we're not just interested in understanding why wars occur, we also want to think about what the international community can do to reduce the prevalence of civil war. In other words, what can the international community do to convince rebel groups and governments inside of countries to settle their differences at the bargaining table rather than fight wars? Well, one possible solution might be to have mediation. And in this lecture, we're asking whether mediation can affect settlement. Not only the outcome of the interaction, whether there's war or peace, but also the terms of the settlement. Well, there are many different types of mediation. One type of mediation is known as shuttle diplomacy. This is where you're essentially acting as a go-between and conveying information to either side. So you might get the rebel group and the government inside of a room. You could start by running over to one side of the room where the rebel group is sitting, talk to them, ask them about what they want and what they're thinking and what they're feeling, and then go over to the government on the other side of the room, relay that information. Maybe the government will tell you something else, and you'll run back to the rebel group and go back and forth like that. That's why it's called shuttle diplomacy. The mediator is going back and forth. Another type of mediation is what's known as procedural mediation. This might be because the mediator is actually capable of dictating the terms of the settlement or actually changing the manner of negotiations between the parties, not just acting as a relay in terms of information, but perhaps saying, here's the line in the sand that we're going to draw. This rebel group is going to get everything to the left of it. The government's going to get everything to the right of it. And if you guys can't agree to that division, then you fight a war. That would be a procedural instance of mediation. And then lastly, directive mediation is when you actually have the mediator intervening in a conflict. So you might be thinking about this in terms of sending troops on the ground to do something about a possible war. Well, in this lecture right now, we're only going to focus on this first type of mediation, shuttle diplomacy. We'll talk about procedural mediation and directive mediation when we get later into this course and discuss mechanism design for procedural mediation and neutral intervention when we get to direct mediation. But for now, we're just looking at shuttle diplomacy, and in fact, the literature in political science and international relations has some strong results about whether shuttle diplomacy can work. So this comes from a paper by Fay and Ramsey, who show that shuttle diplomacy cannot reduce the probability of war unless the mediator has exogenous information about the parties. In other words, exogenous information here means that the mediator knows something about how war will play out that the other sides don't have. The rebel group and the government don't have that information. All right, so thinking about what's going on here, let's first ignore the possibility that there's exogenous information. So let's say the mediator just doesn't know anything at all and is purely acting as this shuttle diplomat going back and forth. Well, the reason that you can't get a reduction in the probability of war is due to the incentives to misrepresent that we have talked about previously. If you're a strong type, you want to act like you're strong so you can get a settlement without having to fight. But if you're a weak type, you also want to act strong because if you're believed, then you'll get more concessions through negotiations than you would if you were to just say, hey, look at me, I'm this weak type right here. You don't have to give me a lot. Well, due to this incentive to misrepresent, if you're a weak type and you're communicating to a shuttle diplomat, if the shuttle diplomat's just running to the other side of the room and telling the other side, maybe the government in this case, that the rebel group has told it that it is a strong type of rebel group, well, then as that rebel group, even if you're weak, you want to tell the shuttle diplomat that you're strong because the shuttle diplomat is simply relaying information for you. And because you have this incentive to misrepresent directly to the other side, if the mediator is just going to the other side and relaying that information, then you have this exact same incentive to misrepresent to the mediator. So absent this extra information, shuttle diplomacy is not going to be able to reduce the probability of war precisely due to this incentive to misrepresent. But the reason that we have this caveat, unless the mediator has exogenous information about the parties, well, if you have exogenous information about the parties, what we've seen previously is that with more information, you get less war. Right? With incomplete information, we've seen the possibility of making overly large demands and having a war as a result of that, whereas we know that with complete information, that we don't get that sort of result. We get a mutually preferable settlement. So this is actually somewhat promising because if you're the United States and you have access to really good satellite images of a possible war zone, that's information that you could potentially be sharing with the rebel group and the government to say, hey, look, rebel group, hey, look, government, here's how this war is going to play out. Actually, this rebel group over here claiming to be strong, not actually all that strong, but the government over here is really strong. And so this is going to inform the parties about each other's strength, which then in turn will reduce the probability of war because they'll be able to make better informed settlement offers to the other side, and they won't be as firm and heavy-handed in negotiations. So that's just one way mediation might be able to help things out when we do have an outside source of information. And we'll talk again later on in this course about mediation and other forms when we get to mechanism design and neutral intervention. Hope you enjoyed this, and I hope to see you next time. Take care.